Hello, welcome to the Sustain, Change and Grow podcast. And I am delighted to talk today to Gerd Gigerenzer, and we will talk about intuition, decision-making in uncertainty, artificial intelligence, the topics that Gerd has worked for a significant amount of his career. Hello, Gerd. Very welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Diliara. I'm glad to be here.
Could you please start by introducing yourself?
I'm Gerd Gigerenzer. I've spent much of my professional time, to think about how people make decisions under uncertainty as opposed to calculable risk, but also how information and risk information can be communicated. And in generally, I'm a curious person.
Yes, I am a very curious person too. And I enjoyed reading your two latest books, which is The Intelligence of Intuition and How to Stay Smart in a Smart World. A lot of questions that we will discuss will be around these two books. People can make decisions based on reason and intuition. The former is highly praised, while the latter is considered flawed. From your work, I conclude that you are an ardent defender of the human intuition and also of human intelligence. And could you please define what the intuition is and why you think people should rely on it more and not less?
Yeah. So intuition is a form of unconscious intelligence. It has three properties. It is based on years of experience with a certain topic. Second, one feels quickly what one should do, or what's the case, or what one should not do. And third, one cannot explain why one feels this way. So intuition is not a sixth sense. It's not God's voice. It's also not something that only women have. Everyone with experience and a topic has intuitions. So the social sciences, particular behavioral economics, mainstream behavioral economics, I must say, or the heuristics and biases point of view, has looked down at intuition. On the other hand, if you interview or study chess players like Magnus Carlsen or Judith Podia, they will insist that their success is in part due to intuition. And the point is not that we should oppose intuition to deliberate reason. That's the wrong point. We need both. So a doctor who sees a patient regularly, and today the doctor feels something is different, but cannot explain what's different, that's an intuition based on long years of experience, and it's quickly in consciousness, but the doctor cannot explain why. But the next step is to do diagnostics and use deliberate reasoning in order to find out what's wrong. So there's an interplay. Often intuition gives you the hypothesis, and deliberate thinking works it out. So intuition is a form of intelligence that's unconscious, and without intuition, you wouldn't get very far. There will be little innovation, little discovery, and little scientific innovation. So intuition, think about Gary Klein's work on firefighters, on military personnel who have year-long experience with a real problem, and then standing in front of a house that's burning, have an intuition where to go. The real point is that the person has long-term experience with a certain subject matter. And then the person sees things that others don't see.
What is the relation between intuition and innovation?
I think it's very crucial. The big innovations are probably not possible without intuition. And part of innovation is also substantial knowledge about a certain topic. So science progresses by knowing about a certain topic and then thinking beyond the borders. One should not confuse psychological studies with undergraduates with true intuition. The undergraduates may have intuitions about their own things. Some of them may be good at some sports, or how to handle people, or how to be an undergraduate. But intuition, as I define it, needs experience with a topic. Now, the part of intuition that one doesn't know why one feels what one feels, that is unconscious. And we can learn intuition in two different ways. One is to learn it consciously, to learn a rule. For instance, how to bend your shoelaces or how to do a tie. But after some time, it becomes unconscious. And actually, when you then think while you're doing your shoelaces or doing a tie, then you may actually get confused and can't do it anymore. So that's the conscious way. You learn a rule and it becomes automatic. The unconscious way is there is never any deliberate thinking about the issue. So for instance, when I worked with police officers at the LA International Airport, whose task is to detect drug couriers, then this is a situation where the police officers learn how to detect a drug courier, that's someone who flies in to LA and with a bag of money, maybe 100,000, and leaves a few hours later with a suitcase of drugs. And the drug officer can tell, not with certainty, but with high probability, the one drug courier in a crowd of 100, 200, 300 people. When I asked them, how do you do this? The answer was, I can't tell. I just see there's something wrong with this person. The best thing one of them could tell me is that he's looking for someone who is looking for him. So the drug courier also looking for whether there's police around, and the police is not there in uniform. How is this being learned? So one case, Dan Horan, he told me that he has been walking through the airport for years with an experienced colleague. And the experienced colleagues said him at the beginning, Dan, do you see this man over there? And Dan Horan saw 50 men. And slowly he began to see. But he never could tell how he does it to detect a drug courier. So that's the second way to learn intuitions. It's never conscious. But one can figure out that. For instance, we learn to distinguish a real smile from a fake smile. Yeah. Most people don't know how they do it, and they've never been taught. That's the same way. It's intuitive. Most people can't do it. They cannot explain it, and they immediately know it. And experiments can show what the difference is. And the difference is if you move your eyebrows, that's a real smile. If it's only down here at your mouth, that's the fake smile. This is why during during COVID-19, where people were wearing masks, people could easily tell a real smile from a fake one. So it's an instance of less information is better.
So it's not really expertise, but it's the unconscious learning, or just because we're observing so many things of our life, so we can relate the smile with the attitude without ever being conscious about it.
Right? Yeah.
Why the intuition is considered flawed? I must say, when I read the book by Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, I had a hurting feeling that people are just profoundly wrong all the time. They have numerous unconscious biases, and we are prone to wrong decisions. Furthermore, business world actually exploits these flaws to their benefits. From your book, I understand that you disagree with Kahneman, the Nobel laureate, by the way. So could you explain why?
Yeah. So let's start with the claim that intuition is often wrong. It's never very clear what's being written in the heuristics and bias of literature. But what's clear is that all the examples used show that intuition, mostly intuition about probability, goes wrong, despite the assertion that, for instance, heuristics could be sometimes good and sometimes bad. So the key difference is that in almost all of the examples by Danny Kahneman and by others, there are undergraduates tested on problems they have mostly never seen before. So they cannot have any intuition. And in the few examples where experts are being analyzed, like in the so-called hot hand fallacy. So the hot hand fallacy is the alleged fallacy of coaches and players that a player could get hot for a limited time and just be better. So basketball is an example. And in that cases, we know now that it's not the statistical thinking of the coaches and the players that's wrong, but actually the statistical thinking of the researchers who blame coaches about wrong intuitions. So Miller and Zanjuro have written a great paper in Econometrica that gives this in detail. So here's the first lesson. One cannot make real judgments about intuitions, about when one studies people who by definition have no experience with the problem. And the problems are mostly textbook problems and made up. Second, when one studies real experts, one should be very careful by claiming that they commit fallacies. And one should look at one's own statistical thinking. And I should add here that most of those who blame other people about errors in statistical thinking are no statisticians, including Danny Kahneman. And statistical thinking is not as easy, and one cannot always know what the right answer to a problem is. For instance, related to the hot hand fallacy, one can translate it into the situation of you throw a fair coin and you throw it many times, say 10 times. What's more likely that you observe a string of, say, 3 heads and 1 tail, or 3 heads and 1 head in this long sequence? Now, most people say it's more likely to have 3 heads and 1 tail. But some of my dear colleagues say, no, it's the same probability. Yeah, because everyone is 0.5. That is an instance, an example about an error committed not by ordinary people, but by the researchers in decision making who make this claim. And you can easily verify that by throwing a coin. You don't have to throw it 10 times. You have to throw it more times than the sequence is. If the sequence is 3 heads and 1 tails or 4, you need to throw it at least 5 times, and then you will find out, to their surprise, that people are right. So this is just an example. The general point is, even statistical intuitions are not so often wrong as being claimed. And sometimes the researchers get it wrong. And second, to study intuition, one needs to study people who have experience with something. So firefighters or baseball players or musicians or scientists about their own thing, or chess players. And then one learns not only that intuitions are amazingly good, but also that often making a judgment quickly has a higher success rate than long, deliberate thinking. So this is the opposite of the so-called accuracy-effort trade-off. The accuracy-effort trade-off says that if you have less effort, or here, if you take less time, then you lose out in accuracy. And that's true. If you confront someone with a topic or a task the person has no experience with. But it's not true if you study experts on their own topics. For instance, in my own research group, we've studied handball players and put the experienced players in front of a video that showed a top game. And the instruction was, you will see this for 10 seconds, then it will freeze. Tell me what the person with the ball should do. And then it froze, and the expert said, pass on to the left or loop, something. And then we gave them more time with the frozen video picture to inspect it and generate more options. And the result was that the first option, the intuitive one, was on average the best one. The second option that came to mind, the second best, and so on, and got worse and worse. And if you left them time to think about it, then about 40% of them changed their mind. And after deliberate thinking, came up with a worse option. You can explain why this happened. This is known as the fluency heuristic. The fluency heuristic says, when you make a choice, take the first option that comes to your mind. But it's valid only for experts, not for undergraduates tested on something I've never seen before.
Fluency heuristics, it names it, but it doesn't explain why the first option is the best and why overthinking is actually makes it worse.
The fluency heuristic, like every heuristic, tells you what to do. It doesn't explain why. But the explanation is that because of experience, there is an order of options that come to your mind, and the order has a validity. And it only has a validity if you have experience. So the fluency heuristic will not work for beginners.
There is the first option which comes, which is the best. But why then reasoning makes a worse decision? Why the reasoning doesn't validate the first option?
That's a good question, yes. So we can only speculate about that.
Why there is such a prevalence or like such a strong view that reasoning is or rationality is better than intuition? Why we don't want to value our real human intelligence, but we are actually looking for more instruments, thinking that we are not that good, probably.
So the what I call the war against intuition has started some centuries ago, and one should say that before, so in for a long time, intuition was thought of the highest form of experience. So the in some of the scholastic writings, intuition is the way that angels and other heavenly beings perceive the world. And the argument was because they have no senses, they cannot be deceived by the senses. They experience the world directly. That was the idea that intuition is truth. And that had changed. Later, intuition was associated to women as opposed to men. And not because women are more intuitive, but women have been for a long time being considered as second placed. And intuition then had become the second place underneath reason. So this is the association of the two on the second place. And that was the war of intuition that lasted into the 20th century. You can read in the beginning of the 20th century some of the most respected psychologists making fun about female intuition. And it has gotten a new impulse by the judgment and decision making in the judgment decision making area by the heuristics and biases program that we just talked about. And but that is only one view. In many areas, intuition is highly respected, and particular in areas where people do something in the real world. So, and that holds for mathematicians, where the phrase someone is intuitive can be the highest praise. And there is the great phrase by Blaise Pascal, one of the inventors of probability theory, by the way, who said the heart has its reasons, of which reason knows nothing. That's another definition of intuition. And we have in many areas in businesses, it is totally different from in the psychology research. For instance, Steve Jobs once said, intuition is a very powerful thing, more powerful than intellect. Just to give you a few examples, that this idea about looking down to intuition is limited to parts of the social sciences and also to the prejudices outside in the centuries before. And what we need is to get a healthy understanding of intuition that does not oppose intuition to deliberate reasoning, like a system one against a system two, that does not evaluate one above the other. You need both of them to go together. And also that has a less authoritative way of just to look down at the intuition. And we are losing out because if you don't use your intuition in business, then you lose.
We can also talk about the more general intuition that people have, like, for example, distinguishing between different smiles or making everyday life judgments. Well, they're not called experts, right? Because it's not a specific field, but they have built the expertise from their everyday life. So I'm just trying to make some sort of a distinction. We can't expect intuition from the undergraduates on the topics of the probability theory or some other distinction of the drug dealers, but we can expect the intuition, like proper intuition judgment of the same graduates on other topics which are more human and where they have built their expertise.
Right. I mean, everyone who goes through life with open eyes will form good intuitions about the environment.
This means that people can be trusted to make sound decisions on political issues and other topics related to their everyday life, about their health, about well, okay, financial literacy. Probably they need a bit of more information and knowledge to make proper judgment. Still, the people can be trusted and they don't have to be dictated certain decisions. When I was reading your book, I thought about this example. In Russia, but somewhere in 2000s, 2010 maybe, the government argumented that people cannot choose themselves city mayors because they cannot make sound decisions. They justified it and they removed the elections, and the city mayors were imposed by the top authorities.
This general attitude is called paternalism. And you have paternalism. Paternalism means that some group of people treat the others like children or earlier women. And of course, there are governments who are more paternalistic than others. And the alleged inability of people to make good decisions is the food for the paternalist argument. And we do have in the Western world few governments who would say this openly, that they think that their voters are not really able to understand or to make reasonable judgments. But we do have this kind of soft paternalism. And at the moment, the most well-known version is nudging, and that comes out from the Heuristics and Biases program. It's the same people. And the idea is, first, people are not really literate to deal with risks, which is in part true. But it is in part true because we are not teaching in schools, at universities, risk literacy. Second argument is that it is very hard to de-bias people, so to make them learn to deal with risks. That argument is mostly wrong because we can easily teach people to understand statistical thinking. So in my own work, we have found ways to represent Bayes' rule so that fourth graders already can understand Bayes' rule with problems that are interesting for themselves. So it's not correct. And the conclusion of these two is that the government needs to step in to help people to make the right decisions. And of course, the government knows better than you what's right for you. That's basically the philosophy. And what the government then should do is to nudge people into the right directions. This is not my vision of a democracy. A democracy should do everything to make people competent so that they can make their own informed decisions rather than to nudge them into a direction where, according to the proponents of this view, people themselves would like to be, but don't know that I should go there. So I believe we need to make people strong, not to treat them like sheep.
It's interesting. In the USSR, the education was very good for everyone. Relatively, for example, to the US, where most people don't know much beyond the US, don't know the geography. Yeah, you have a mass of people with whom it's probably easier to guide because they're not educated.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. And that invites a speculation about why people in the West, particularly in the US, think they are so smart. and so free to make the decisions and have free choice compared to Russians, for instance.
Rational thinking infiltrated the economic thinking. Public economic decisions, including the central banks, were taken based on economic models, which also become more and more complex and require more data. But there are certain problems and risks with this approach.
Yeah.
Could you explain why and how the decisions should be made differently?
So it's important to understand what rational theory is. So there are many meanings of that, but the dominant one is purely syntactic. It is the so-called consistency axioms, then the expected utility maximization, and Bayesian probability updating. So there's no content to this idea of rationality, no context, no environment. And you also don't have to know very little. It's calculation. And and these systems work in a situation where Jimmy Savage, the so-called father of Bayesian decision theory, called small worlds, or economists might call it mostly closed worlds. This is a world where you know every possible future state of the world and all of their consequences, for sure. Nothing new can happen. And the important limits and bounds of this form of rationality are called uncertainty and intractability. Intractability means that there is a well-defined problem, but it's so complex that no computer, no human can in any reasonable time find the optimal solution. An example is chess or Go. And these problems are outside of the standard economic theory. The second limitation is uncertainty. Now, uncertainty means not that the probabilities are not known, but uncertainty in the sense of Frank Knight, or also in the sense of Herbert Simon, means that you do not know the state space. New things can happen, or things change. And that's what our real world mostly is. And in this world, you cannot construct a probability distribution over a set of options or events that you don't know. So this is why the former governor of the Bank of England, Mervyn King, together with John Kay, wrote a book, Radical Uncertainty, to promote the view that we need another theory beyond small worlds or closed worlds that are able to deal with uncertainty and intractability. And my own research goes in this direction, and one of the major tools are heuristics. Heuristics can deal with untractable problems, and that's what great chess players use. And heuristics can deal with uncertainty, because the pretense is not that we could know the optimal solution ahead. It's more moderate, that we need to find good solutions or better solutions in a world that is not totally predictable.
Can you please explain what the heuristics are and maybe give some examples?
Let's start with an example from Harry Markowitz, the person who, together with others, founded modern finance theory. And Harry Markowitz got his Nobel Prize in economics for the mean the mean variance model, and that's a portfolio model, and this is standard probability theory. When he made his own investment, so that means his own money, into the for the time after his retirement, then he used his Nobel Prize winning optimization method. So we might think, no, he did not. He used a simple heuristic. The heuristic is called 1 over n. N is the number of assets or options you have. If you have only 2, you do 50-50. If you have 3, you do a third, a third, a third. That's one of the most simple heuristics. There is little calculation involved. And so here's the difference between a heuristic and an optimization model. Now, you might think that what happened to Markowitz? How could he not use the model for which he got the Nobel Prize? Now, a number of studies have shown that 1 over n can beat Markowitz optimization, including modern versions of it. Most of the time, some of the time, that depends on the environment. So on how many options you have and other studies. This study about to find out under what condition an optimization model works or a heuristic works or which one is better, that's the study of ecological rationality. So in this case, you can see the more options you have, the optimization model needs to estimate more and more future averages, variances, and covariances, and thereby incurs more error. While the heuristic 1 over n doesn't calculate or doesn't have to estimate any of these things. So that's the study where my heart is in it, to find out, rather than restarting a prejudice against heuristics or against optimization, you find out how well the strategies work. And then the challenge is to describe the environment, to find the features of the environment, where you can say, if, say, the number of options gets larger and other features, then it is likely that a simple heuristic gets you a higher Sharpe ratio than, say, a mean variance model. This is a question that has been unthinkable. So the ecological rationality question for the last centuries, as long as people believed that the logical rationality or axiomatic rationality, this entire ensemble between expected utility maximization and Bayesian updating, would be a universal theory of rationality. It is not. For instance, it cannot deal with radical uncertainty. It cannot deal with intractability. And it also, anything psychological is alien to the theory. So we need to be more modest and leave expected utility maximization where its place is, within a closed world, the savage small world, and have the courage to extend decision theory so to situations for uncertainty and intractability. And that requires to do more empirical research to find out how experts actually make decisions under uncertainty. And smart heuristics are typically the tool. And there's also a statistical reason why often less is more. So the heuristics are typically much more simpler than optimization models. And a first step is the so-called bias variance trade-off in machine learning that tells you that there is a certain, you need to make strategies sufficiently simple so that don't overfit. And it's not the case that adding more parameter and making more complex and reducing the bias even more will lead to better predictions. No.
Actually, it made me think of one proverb that we have in Russian. Yeah, in the muddy water, the evils live. So that when we have more complexity and more things are not clear, then there are certain interests of certain people to maintain this the water's muddy. This trend into the more complexity is probably also in some people's interests.
Of course, yeah. Why do we have so many laws and regulations? One is we need more lawyers. Why are our tax laws so complicated? Unnecessarily complicated. Tax experts. On finance, similar thing. Yeah? It is not the case that the most complex finance rules guarantee the best outcomes. Not at all. In general, the more uncertainty, the more unpredictability, the better you are advised to make it simple. On the other side, if you have a totally stable world where nothing new happens, do fine tuning and have complex models.
And they're getting more complex and more complex. So we really see the tendency that we get more data and we add more variables and we add more econometrics and more models. And now it's probably a good transition to also the AI, the artificial intelligence, which is getting even more of a black box out of which we get certain predictions, suggestions of what decisions should be made. That's your second book, How to Stay Smart in the Smart World.
Yes. And that's the key message. The smarter technology is getting, the smarter we need to become. And it's not leaning back. And the same principle that we just talked about, that you need to make complex models function the better if you have a stable world, like a small world. But under uncertainty, that's not the case. Make it simple. Einstein called this, you should make everything as simple as possible, but not too simple. That's the trade-off. Yeah. So the same insight holds in AI. The big successes of AI are in worlds that are stable. And that is chess, this is Go, this is industry applications. And that's also ChatGPT. So the world of chess is there are rules and nothing ever changes. And ChatGPT has a source of words in a language and their correlations, and that doesn't change very much. In these situations, complex algorithms, they flourish. On the other hand, if you have problems that where the future is less certain and not like the past, it's no longer the case. Examples are human behavior, which is highly unpredictable, and also the behavior of certain viruses like the flu and COVID-19. So the corona SARS virus. And in that case, if you want to predict behavior, the general result is that you can do it best with 1, 2, 3, or 4 variables and not more. So, for instance, you may remember Google flu trends. The Google engineers tried to predict the flu, the spread of the flu, precisely the flu-related doctor visits in certain regions. And with big data and a secret algorithm. This is now a highly uncertain world. It's not a stable world. The flu virus is not very reliable. It doesn't do what we expect. And we have shown that if you just use a single variable to do the so-called nowcast, because the goal was to know what's happening now, then this variable, which is recency, so the most recent data point that we have, predicts the spread of the flu better than Google's big data analysis. And for the entire 8 years, Google flu trends reign, and for each year and for each update of the algorithm. So this is an example of an uncertain world, an unstable world, where make it simple gives you better predictions than complex black box models. In this case, one single data point that's being used by the recency heuristic is better than big data. That wouldn't be the case if you do chess. This is well defined, and then use as complex algorithms as you can pay for.
What about inflation and financial risk?
Oh, so the analysis I have done I have done analysis on exchange rates and also on stock. So the DAX, the German DAX, and what's very clear is the prediction of the banks that are made every year, they are basically worthless in both cases. But we can identify the heuristics being used to make the predictions. It is, if it went up in the last time interval, we predict it continues going up. So every change in the orientation is being missed. So that is not a world where complex methods are promising. But you're right, the tendency also in banking supervision is make it always complex. So Basel I had something like less than 50 pages, if I remember correctly. Basel II had in the hundreds, some 360 or so. Basel III had many, many more, and we're waiting for Basel IV. And I bet it won't be simpler.
Are heuristics universal, or they are context and culture based?
Heuristics are context dependent. That's what the term ecological rationality means. So there is no method and no strategy that is universal in the sense that it's best in all situations. This is a big fiction. So expected utility maximization is not the best method in every situation, nor is Bayesian probability updating. They are all context specific, but that's often denied because there's the big dream, Leibniz dream of a universal algorithm that would solve all problems and also all the bickering between scholars. Sit down and calculate. That's the idea. Leibniz hasn't found it. Nobody has found it, but the dream is still around.
And how people could use heuristics more consciously and maybe in a better way? Because I imagine you can't go through the list of all the heuristics and say, okay, this situation, no, this doesn't work, this doesn't work. So, like, how can you really be better at taking better decisions using heuristics?
That's called the study of ecological rationality. So if I'm in a restaurant and it's a good restaurant, then I might only ask the waiter what he would eat here today. If it's not a good restaurant, I wouldn't do that. So there are some contingencies, how you behave depending on the environment. And the same holds for model building. If you have a stable world, then make a complicated model. If it's not stable, then don't. Make it simple. So this is a kind of thinking. So heuristic thinking is about a heuristic from the adaptive toolbox and an environment. And it's about the fit between the two. There's never a heuristic that's the best. And there's no single heuristic. We just fall in this trap because we have been made to believe that there would be one single method for best inference. And even statisticians disagree. There are some who still have this illusion. You find some fundamental Bayesians who think that Bayes would be the best tool in all situations. It's a big illusion. Bayes needs a stable world. If you have an unstable world, good luck with Bayes. And we need to be more modest and also take up the challenge to think about where is imitation a good idea? And then we need to distinguish between imitate the best, so the successful, or imitate the majority. And where does this work? And where does it not work? Where should I go after name recognition? So I've heard of this product and compared to one I've not heard of. So these are the questions that a science of heuristic poses.
How do you take your own decisions? Do you have a protocol? Do you have a well-established situation heuristic relationship?
One thing I've learned from years studying decision making is that I make decisions faster. And there's a reason for that, because if you deliberate too long, you mostly don't win anything, you lose time. Another thing I've learned is to organize my environment so that I can work better. So for instance, when I'm writing on a book, on an article, I shut down all distractions like email, various other things that could just lead me astray. And I want to have for a number of hours peace. Otherwise, I cannot really think. So that's one lesson, the make decisions faster and dare to make the decisions and take the responsibility. And the other that I mentioned is to create an environment where you can use your brain rather being used by others who distract you all the time.
Yeah, indeed, the brains are used by so many devices in our environment now. So, what do you define as being smart?
How do you define being smart? That is basically keeping the remote control for your emotions and behavior in your own hand instead of being remote controlled. Part of that is, so as I mentioned before, shut down. If you have social media, shut down them for some times rather than being the ball played by others who want to send you their photos of what they're eating or other interesting time all the day. And it also means to understand technology, who is behind technology, and in a way so that you are not as easily being remote controlled. And that kind of understanding is not far developed. And the studies have looked at, for instance, at executives, found that most of them have no experience in either statistics or AI, and they have to decide where they're going into the technology. Similar studies have been shown for journalists who write about AI. A study in the UK found that about 60% of journalists who wrote AI articles on AI, from the Telegraph to the Guardian, basically just repeated what the companies told them exactly. The advertising part of the company and the PR part, and had no own judgment. And we colleagues in Stanford who study undergraduates and high school students find that these students who are native, who are digital natives, they do not understand how to judge the trustworthiness of websites or to tell facts from fakes. So there is a blind spot here. We need to do something that everyone can tell, or can develop a number of heuristics to tell trustworthy from non-trustworthy. And the lateral reasoning is an example for such a heuristic. So the colleagues in Stanford put the undergraduates and high school students in front of a screen and show them actual websites. For instance, a website about minimum wage. Is this a good idea? And ask them to judge the trustworthiness of this website. So who's behind it? What I found is over 90% just started reading on top and ended reading at the end, and then used cues like it looks good, it's cool, the design is nice, and maybe the author has a PhD, so it must be trustworthy. But these students were using techniques from pre-digital ages for judging the trustworthiness. Lateral reading is a heuristic, and it tells you the following. You just start reading on the top, but only read until you know what this is about, and then stop. And go into About Us, find out what the website says, who is behind it, but then leave the site. And that's what digital technology really helps us to do, and go out. And then you need a little bit of knowledge and to find out on your search engine about who is really behind that one, who what do you find under About Us. And then in this case, you might find out that the New York Times has reported about this company who set up the website, and it's a PR company that is paid by other firms who don't like minimal wage. So this is an example how we can teach heuristics to digital natives so that they can better understand who is telling them what and for what reason. And we have, for instance, in Germany, there have been the European elections, and in some states, 16-year-olds can vote. And the disturbing result from my point of view was I was always arguing for let young people vote, but let them do like a driver's license so they understand what democracy is, and then if they pass, let them vote. But what we found is that the young voters, more than the older voters together, voted for a right-wing party, the AfD, and it's happening in several countries. In Germany, you can put this down. Why this is? Because this right-wing party is much more present in social media than all other parties together, and they're shaping that. So that's what I mean to be smart in a smart world, to understand how you're being manipulated by others and to learn the tools and the heuristics to stay in control.
And do you see these things to be taught in school or in the universities, or at least an intention or understanding that it's important to teach students or pupils these qualities?
My experience, it is too little. It may happen, but there is little emphasis on that. Two examples. In Germany, billions are spent on bringing the digital world into schools by governments. But what governments means is not understanding about facts and fakes or trustworthiness, but they mean technology, laptops. There's not much here. The same Weinberg, who is in the Stanford Educational Department, told me that in Stanford, his educational program has gotten very little attention and support from the university compared to everyone else in the university who wanted to have a piece of cake from selling digital products. So in my perception, and I hope I would be wrong, but in my perception, there is little attention and little money spent on making young people smart. There's much money spent on making IBM and others rich.
Is it overlooking because politicians are not aware of the risk, or is it something else?
Yeah, it probably has many reasons. One important reason is lobbyism. The representatives of Apple, of Google, and the other big technology firms, they are in every government. Those who want to make people smart, there is no real lobby because you can sell that. And also note that the studies with politicians, which are very few, indicate that most of the politicians have little understanding of digitalization. For instance, the PISA, the international PISA study that looks at 15-year-olds in OECD countries, had in 2018 a few questions about distinguish facts from just opinions or fakes, and found that the far majority, again something like 90% across the countries, the far majorities of 15-year-olds didn't know how to distinguish that. And then there was a sub-analysis, interestingly by McKinsey, who looked about which types of digital tools correlate with better understanding. What I found is that better understanding then is measured by the usual criteria of PISA, like math and natural sciences. And they found that when teachers had digital tools such as like data projectors and whiteboards, they in these schools the student performance was half a year ahead of those who did not have these tools. So that's correlations, yeah, not causations. And they also found in the schools where every student had a tablet, in those schools the students were about half a year behind those with no tablet. So what does this tell us? Yeah? Digital tools are not the same. We need to distinguish which one works in what context and which one don't work. And second, we need to do empirical studies, not just sell the tools to schools.
Right. And I think what is indeed missing, what you mentioned, is that together with the hardware, so the laptops and the materials, should come also the relevant education of how this should be used.
Right. The smarter the technology gets, the smarter the people need to get. We need to stay in charge, not lean back and let Siri or Alexa decide our life.
I think it kind of comes up as a whole story. If people assume they're flawed from the start, and they indeed in certain areas cannot compete against the machines, then there is a somewhat natural tendency of relying on these machines to make your life easier and also better. But what you're saying, we're also losing.
It's again, the machines are good, or say, deep neural networks are good at certain tasks, and they're particularly good if the world is stable, like in chess and Go, or in industry applications, or ChatGPT searches through the corpuses of words and looks at their correlations, and they don't change. But the machines are not very good in uncertainty. So predicting human behavior, predicting the flu, predicting the SARS-CoV virus, and so on. And there's beyond that, there's also the other questions. Do you want to stay in charge? Or do you want someone else who runs your life? And for instance, Eric Schmidt, long ago, when he was still the CEO of Google, said, His vision is something like that, that people in the morning would ask Google, what should I do today? What should I do with the rest of my life? That's his vision. So we, as the total consumer, we're giving away our own ability to plan, our own decision making, our own values. We give everything away to Google or to another type of tech industry.
There is another very big chunk of your work on the risk and communication of risk.
Yeah.
If you can summarize the main messages in a couple of sentences of what you learned and what people should know about risk.
So the term risk now applies to a situation where we have some reliable probabilities. That's no longer uncertainty. Yes. So, and these situations exist. So, what is the weather report? So, there's a 30% chance of rain tomorrow. That's a risk. The point is that most people have never learned to understand these risks. So, do you know what it means? There's a 30% chance of rain tomorrow? No. I live in Berlin. Most Berliners think, oh, it means that it will rain in 30% of the time tomorrow. That is 7 to 8 hours. Others think it means it will rain in 30% of the area. That is likely not where I live. Most New Yorkers we have studied think neither of that is true. The 30% refers to a different reference class, namely days. So it will rain in 30% of the days for which this prediction has been made. That means tomorrow, mostly not at all. And we have done a representative study in Spain. What do the Spaniards think that a 30% chance of rain means? They have a very different opinion. So the majority thinks it means that 3 meteorologists think it will rain and 7 not. So this is a very trivial example about risk illiteracy. It shows that a majority of people don't understand a message that is that is a daily type of message. It's not about something complicated, and do not know to ask a very simple question. That means percent of what? So what's the reference class? And it could be days, it could be time, it could be region, or it could be meteorologists, and it could be something else. And the risk literacy is something that is not very developed. And we see this when you think back about the time of COVID-19. These were all numbers. Very few people understood the numbers. Politicians and virologists, some virologists included. So in these studies that I have done with doctors, with federal judges, with managers, I find that the majority don't understand the numbers they're talking about. So here we are with risk literacy. And actually, risk literacy can be taught in a very efficient way. Like the questions always ask percent of what? And you may be surprised.
Maybe you can also give an example of how people overestimate risk and for this reason take wrong decisions regarding particularly the health tests.
Yeah. The health area is a particular prominent one. So here's an example about. So the UK has many great traditions, like the tea and the green and the scones, but also the contraceptive pill scare. And it happens all couple of years with a news report. That, and here is the most prominent scare in the UK, The news reported that women who take the pill of the third generation have a risk of a thrombosis that's increased by 100%. Would you take the pill? 100% seems to be almost certain.
Probably not.
And many British women thought so, and when they heard the news, stopped taking the pills, which led to unwanted pregnancies and abortions. And actually, according to one estimate, within the year after the news, within 1 year, about 30,000 abortions more than usually happened in England and Wales. Now, how much is 100%? The study showed that out of 14,000 women who took the pill of the previous generation, one had a thrombosis, and out of 14,000 who took the pill of the new generation, it increased from 1 to 2. So there's an absolute risk of 1 in 14,000, but one can express it as a relative risk of 100% increase from 1 to 2. See, relative risk increases cause anxieties, fear, unnecessary abortions. If one would have explained the risk to women in absolute risk and would have said women who take the new generation pill increase their risk of a thrombosis from 1 to 2 in every 14,000, probably nobody would have cared. And why are relative risks being used? To get attention in a world where everyone is shouting, and also to generate fear. And fear gets your attention. So here's an example. The difference between a relative and absolute risk could be taught to every fourth grader with real-world example. So from 1 to 2 in 14,000 could be said as 1 in 14,000 increase, or 100%. And it's not being done. And the pill scares go on. And the pill scares is not the only kind where relative risks are used to mislead people in health. I have a TED Ed video, so TED, like TED Talks, and like education, on relative risks, which is called Why People Fear the Wrong Things.
I
It has
will
a
put
shark
it.
on it. And it's a story, another story about relative risk. So that was in a popular magazine in Germany. There was a report that shark attacks had increased by 100%. Now, you are on vacation. And would you let your children in the sea? Or would you yourself go surfing if shark attacks had increased by 100%? Always ask for absolute risk increases, and then what happened? There are always about 10 deadly shark attacks worldwide a year, and the year before it was 6, and in the year where the report was made the number was 12. So an increase of 6 worldwide is the same as 100%.
So when talking about risk, there are two heuristics. So the first one is to ask what is the reference, and second one is to ask what is the absolute change.
Right, yeah. And then you get smart. You start understanding why others and how they do it want to mislead you and control your behavior. So it's done with medication. Statins are, the effect of statins is sold by relative risk reductions, 50%, 33%. Looks impressive. If you look at the absolute increase, it's almost invisible. Just another example. Cancer screening is sold by telling people about relative risk decreases, like mammography screening reduces your risk by 25% or 20% or 30%, and people think that the life of 20 out of 100 are saved. No, it's the same trick again. So in this case, the absolute risk reduction, so women in their 50s, you have a randomized trials, so half of them participate in screening, half of them not. What happens 10 years later? And if you look at every 1,000 women who don't participate in screening, 10 years later, about 5 died from breast cancer. And among those who participated, it's 4. Now you could honestly say the effect is 1 in 1,000, 999. There's nothing.
Mm.
But that doesn't sell screening. You say, oh, breast cancer screening reduces mortality from breast cancer by 20%,
Mhm.
from 5 to 4, see? And often it's rounded up to 30% or more. That looks even better.
In France, there is this program where they recommend women above 40, I guess, to go the mammography, and it's free. So, well, but the government pays, which sounds like a good thing, right? Like it sounds like a care for people.
Yeah. And if you consider that closely, you might go on our website of the Harding Center for Risk Literacy, Harding Center for Risk Literacy, and then you find more information. For instance, about mammography, what's very important are the negative sides. So unnecessary biopsies, unnecessary surgery, and also the information that you will most likely not find in your countries, information leaflets, that if you don't look at breast cancer mortality reduction, but any kind of cancer mortality reduction, including breast cancer, there's nothing. There's not even 1 in 1,000. There's nothing. And that can have to do because the many unlucky, at least several unlucky people have several cancer, and the cancer is not always is in just one organ, and one doesn't know which one to use for the death certificate, and that's a well-known problem. And there are other reasons. Also the radiation by the mammography or by the treatment causes a number of cancers. And so you need to also ask the other question, is there an effect on total cancer mortality or total mortality? And then the answer is no. It's a big business. And you should get smart to take the decisions in your own lives. And if it's government officials who decide about that screening, understand the numbers, then my bet would be most don't. And they can be easily tricked in.
It's not a conspiracy.
I mean, there are always some people who have interests, I would say, that just want to make money. And then there is a very useful lack of statistical literacy. Or just imagine you are the CEO of a medical technology provider who sells X-rays and other machines. And you would read, for instance, into the most recent meta-analysis about the effect of cancer screening tests by Michael Breithauer and colleagues in JAMA, so the Journal of the American Medical Association Internal Medicine. Then they would see that the estimate how many days mammography screening prolongs your life is exactly 0. And we are not talking here about the negative effects it has. The anxiety that women often have going from one screening to the other one, the unnecessary partial or total operation on the breast, and many things. And many other screenings are closed. They only find one cancer screening where they think it has actually a positive effect. And that's sigmoidoscopy for colon cancer.
Are you aware of any regulation or discussion of the regulation where natural frequencies or the absolute values must be published when communicating such information?
Yes, there are guidelines for medical publishing, like Consort, who say that the absolute reductions need to be spelled out in the abstract. But there are also studies who show that in many cases, this is not followed. Why? Well, you can guess. In the US, an estimate is that about 2/3 of all studies published in the top medical journals are funded by the industry. And if you would be a representative of the industry, understandably, you don't want to see the absolute numbers in the abstract. You want to see
Impressive numbers.
yeah. And so this is part of becoming risk literate, to understand what's being done with your mind, with your anxieties.
Thank you very much, Gerd. I think that was super powerful discussion, and I learned a lot, and hopefully the listeners will do. And thank you very much for your time and for all your research. That was a great pleasure.
Okay, it was a pleasure to talk to you.